Hey guys, welcome back. So today's video is a little bit different. I know it's only my third video, but it's different from those two because those were a little bit more like science based, I guess, if you will. Today I just wanted to share 10 tips, tricks, advice for new parents, and just things that were helpful for me now that I have two, and specifically two under two. These are just things that reflecting on them, I didn't hear a lot of these, and just reflecting on them now, they can hopefully help you out if you are soon to be a parent or a new parent. And yeah, so let's get into them. Again, we don't have a lot of time because both of them are sleeping, so cross our fingers that they stay asleep through the video. So number one would be, and these aren't in any particular order, just kind of how they came to my mind, but number one would be to prioritize. So I heard somebody explain it like this once, and it was helpful for me. You can't juggle and keep all of the balls in the air at the same time. So like your house, your job, your baby, your relationship with your spouse, how you look, like your fitness and all of those kinds of things. It's just impossible to keep them all functioning at an optimal level, especially when you are going to be a new parent. The way that someone explained it was that you have glass balls and you have plastic balls. So the plastic balls obviously can be dropped, glass ones cannot. So there are certain things that cannot be neglected or let slide for a little bit. Newly postpartum, obviously things like taking care of the baby, so them eating, sleeping, being fed can't really not be done. But your house, for example, can be not as clean, or like the laundry, you can get very behind on the laundry, things like that. Now, I've heard other people say that before, but I think an important distinction there is that sometimes living in a house that is very messy, or there's like stuff everywhere, can make your mental health worse, and can actually create more chaos for you. So while I say you can like technically drop that ball, you might just want to find alternatives if you can. If you have the resources and the means to delegate those to outside people. So you hire a cleaning person for a couple weeks postpartum, or like meal prep. You can have like register for that on your baby registry. There's a lot of helpful ones that you could register for, like meals that would come to you that are easier to do. Sorry about this, not my son put in my hair. So meals is another one, because obviously you need to be nourished. It's very important, and your spouse probably needs to eat too. Just delegating those things if you can, because sometimes just letting that go is worse for you. Also eating on paper plates. I know that seems like silly, and it's not the greatest for the environment, but just not having to have plates cleaned and washing them is very helpful. So paper plates for the first couple of weeks, very helpful. Second thing, if baby is happy doing whatever they're doing, don't feel the need to intervene or be involved or like to play with them. I, with my son, was like on the floor constantly and like talking to him all the time, like even when he was like a couple weeks old. And he is much more of a Velcro baby now. He's almost 3, which is totally fine. It could just be his personality. But sometimes they just are, if they're happy playing on the floor and looking up at the ceiling, like just let them do that. You don't have to get involved. And it's very easy for either parent, but especially for moms, I find that to feel like you have to be interacting with them all the time. They really don't need that much stimulation. They get overstimulated very easily. And so if they're happy, just let them be happy. They don't need to be happier. It sounds simple, but for me, with my son, I did not do that. And with my daughter, I did. And yeah, you also can just have that time if they're playing with they're a little bit older, they're sitting up, they're playing with stuff in the kitchen. They always go through your cabinets and pull everything out. Let them pull it all out and make all sorts of noise and be crazy. And you can just sit there and watch them, or don't watch them, but know where they are. Read a book, drink some water. You just don't need to make them happier. You don't need to be involved in every aspect. And I promise, especially once they're toddlers, they will have plenty of time to tell you, Mom, look at this. Mom, come play with me. When they're little and they're not asking for you, just sit back. Number 3, take more videos. So I know that like we live in a social media culture, like taking lots of pictures and taking live whatever live streams on Instagram or on YouTube. But having those videos is so nice, and especially to make sure that you're in some of them. So you and your spouse. If you have to set up a tripod, sure. If you have to do whatever, but just make sure you get in them because you're going to want to be in them. And also, I will tell you that when little ones get a little bit older, like my daughter's 1 right now, even at her age, they're obsessed watching themselves. It's hilarious. So they like watching other kids, I think sometimes too, but like watching videos of themselves, they just love for some reason. My son was obsessed with it and would ask for the videos. So if all else fails and you're needing something to make them laugh or distract them, it always works. So take more videos. A mindset shift. So this is kind of a big one. I think, you often hear it gets better or it gets easier from other parents that have been where you are now. And it does. But that is not the most helpful advice sometimes to hear. And I think sometimes it can just feel like your feelings are minimized because it gets better. So stop worrying about it being crappy now. And I can say that there just are some points in being a parent that are very hard. Like, I wish more people had told me that. I think it's just a lot of people don't want to scare other people, but it's very hard. It's a very hard job. It's 24/7 all the time, and it's the most amazing, but it is the most hard. So I think hearing that sometimes is not the most helpful. But I do think having this mindset shift of pretending that you are in the future and you have gotten this gift of being able to travel back in time to when your kids were babies or when they're whatever age they're at right now that you're struggling with, and to just look at it from that perspective, because it does pass. In the moment, it does not feel like it's going to pass, and there are certain phases of childhood and babyhood that just might be really hard for you. You might have heard people say, like, I just don't like the infant stage. I just don't like the newborn stage. I don't like the toddler stage. But I think if you can zoom out in the future, when your kids are older, you will miss it. I haven't heard from anybody that says that they are so glad that their kids are old and don't live with them anymore. Like, you just miss it. So I think having that perspective can be a little bit more actionable, and feel like it just feels better to think about it that way, as opposed to thinking it's going to get better, this will pass. Because also that this will pass and it gets easier, there's no way to quantify that. Like, well, when does it get easier? Next week? I haven't slept for 5 days. Is the 6th day, am I going to sleep? Like, there's a lot of unknowns, especially as a new parent. So just having that mindset shift of like, well into the future, your kids will not be waking up in the middle of the night or struggling to nurse or whatever issue you're going through. So I just find that is pretty helpful. Number 5, be cautious of the advice that you get from others. And I know the irony of this is not lost on me. I am giving you, this is a video about advice, and then I'm saying that, but I mean that more in the individual sense that when you're struggling with something, sometimes you just need a community, which I think a lot of us have lost, of people that just have been where you're at and understand you. And instead of trying to fix you or fix your problem, you want to just be heard and validated. So if you're struggling with sleep or something like that, and then your friends or family members, especially like parents or in-laws, say, oh, well, this is what we did and it worked great, it can almost make it worse, especially because if it's something you've already tried, it's not helpful. And everybody's baby is different. So generationally, things change. We do things differently than our parents did, maybe. Or it just, all things don't work for all babies. Like, certain things don't work. We didn't sleep train either of our kids. And people, like, a lot of people feel like if they don't sleep train, they can't complain or vent about being tired, because then people are like, well, we sleep trained. But like, not everybody wants to sleep train. So it's just being cautious about that. You can get ideas from other people, but ultimately I think it is a skill to learn your baby and to listen to your own intuition, because even each baby is very different. My 2 kids are drastically different. My daughter's only 1, so I don't know how different they will be in the toddler years, but yeah, they're just totally different. You might parent exactly the same, your kids are totally different. So you just have to figure out what works best for you. And I know that sounds so simple and so silly, But just because something worked for some of your friends does not mean that it is going to work for you. And just kind of being okay to start a plan and abandon your plan and try something else, or have no plan. Your baby will sleep eventually. Your baby will eat normal food eventually. They will walk eventually. They will talk eventually. They will crawl eventually. Now, this is not me saying don't take advantage of interventions like earlier on if they're having trouble walking, talking, sleeping, those kinds of things. Obviously, seek support from professionals and outside people if you need to. But most of those things they are going to do, whether you force them or followed a certain program or a certain schedule, they will do that eventually. And also just another note on, it's another point. We'll get to that in a minute. So next thing, less containers and more floor kind of touches on the walking, crawling thing. So with my son, for whatever reason, I don't know why, and a lot of us feel this way, we've been like heavily marketed to, that we have all these containers for our kids. So like you've got the Jolly Jumper, you have the bouncy seat, you have the Baby Bjorn sit me up bouncer chair thing, you have their bassinet, you have a crib for them. All of these things are containers. Even when you're baby wearing them, they're in a container. So it's just very foreign for a lot of us to put our babies on the floor, and I do know why, but like that just shouldn't be. Like back in the day or in other countries, they don't have all these things. They put their babies on the floor. Like the floor is fine. Is your baby gonna eat dog hair? Yes. Is your baby going to find every little, even if you're a very cleanly person, they will find the one feather from your couch pillow or the one speck of dust and they will eat it. Builds their immune systems, what I say. When my daughter's got a handful of dog hair in her mouth, no dog allergies over here. But yes, just less containers, more floor. So much better for their hips, so much better for their shoulders, for their core, for their strength. Basically being able to integrate all of the infant reflexes gets better when they're allowed to move more freely. Now, baby wearing is a little bit different because they do still have more mobility, especially of like their hip joints and things like that. But they're also getting other benefits from baby wearing. So even if you're technically containing them, they get so many benefits from like temperature regulation, mood regulation, heat, everything, that oxytocin from being skin to skin with you. So I don't really count that as a container, but yeah, just put them on the floor. They'll be fine. And this isn't to say that they necessarily will move sooner or you want them to move sooner if they're on the floor, but the more they get used to it and the more strength that they develop, their gross motor will be improved. So my son walked at 11 months, and we did put him on the floor a decent amount, but we put my daughter on the floor a lot more, I would say. Or to keep her away from my son, we did actually put her in the pack and play, raised up with a activity mat in there, which is a hack that I do recommend, because then they're up, but they can still play and like roll around. They have very free range of motion, but they're not on the floor where the toddler can throw things at them or run them over or feed them things. But yeah, she walked at 9 months. So sometimes you don't want that second baby walking that early, but just let them move more. Next thing, sleep is not linear. So you might decide to sleep train, you might decide not to sleep train, but even if you do sleep train, I think a lot of people are under the assumption that once you sleep train and you've sleep trained, that your baby is sleep trained. I have talked to tons of parents that then they had to re-sleep train like multiple times. So some people do not have to do that. Some people have great sleepers, and that's not the case. You sleep train once, they're sleep trained. But when they are teething, when they are sick, when they are going through a leap and learning new skills, learning how to walk, learning how to talk, all of those things can lead to waking up at night. So I think going into it, having this assumption, like going into having babies or to sleep training, having this assumption that, oh, they slept 6 hours, now they're always gonna sleep at least 6 hours, it's just gonna get better from here, is what kind of sets us up as parents to either feel like failures or to feel frustrated in parenthood, motherhood. And it just doesn't work that way. So obviously, like I said, we did not sleep train. My daughter was sleeping fully through the night, like 12 hours by 9 months, and it was great. And then she just recently started waking back up again. In the past week, she has woken up, I wanna say Like last night, I know it was 3 or 4 times, and the past 4 nights it's been at least twice. So yeah, it's just not linear. It's not gonna just keep following that upward trajectory of getting better. It's more of a up and down line, kind of like the stock market. Ultimately, it goes up eventually, but there's a lot of peaks and valleys in there. So just preparing for that. And then feeding to sleep is okay. So it all goes back to what is like your priority. If you are someone that really needs a lot to function on a lot of sleep and it's affecting you, this is very different than just saying, like, these are my recommendations. This is just what I did. But I feed my kids to sleep. So my son, it was awesome. He fed to sleep until he was probably like a year. And then we had some moments, some snapshots in there that he wouldn't fall asleep when feeding. So that was tough. It also did make it hard because I was the only one that put him to sleep because I was feeding him to sleep. So there are like caveats to that situation, but I think there are some big accounts out there that say to not do that, that it should be like eat, awake, sleep, eat, sleep, awake. I don't know. The easy method, I think. Eat, awake, sleep, you time. That's what it is. If that works for you, that's awesome. If eat, awake, sleep works for your baby and you, that's great, because then, yes, they probably will sleep a lot easier. They'll put themselves to sleep. Like, that's awesome. Hats off. My kids, that like didn't really work. My daughter is a little bit easier. So if she has already eaten recently and it's time for a nap or it's time for bed, I can put her down and she will sometimes fall asleep, but oftentimes not. And oftentimes just with our schedules, it's time for her to eat right when it's time for her to either nap or go to bed. So I feed her to sleep, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I promise they will sleep eventually. It's not wrong. If that's what's working for you, don't change something that's working just because someone else told you that you need to change it. If it's not working for you, change it. But if it is, keep letting it ride. Number 8, figure out what works with your spouse. So the main thing with this is I've heard a lot of parents that are like, oh, like if the mom's breastfeeding specifically, oh, my husband wakes up every time that I get up with the baby and like fills up my water bottle and like does something for me, or mom will like feed the baby and the baby doesn't fall asleep breastfeeding, so then dad like rocks the baby so mom can go back to sleep. If that works for you, that's great. But I think just having open communication with your husband or spouse or significant other about what the expectation is for both of you and what you think will work best, and then obviously knowing that in the moment you might have to change that. But my husband did not get up in the middle of the night with me. I think with my son, he might have a couple of times when we were like very newly postpartum, because I did have to have a C-section with my son. So we had to sleep on the first floor because I wasn't allowed to do stairs. And I think he was up just because he could hear the baby, and breastfeeding at first was like hard for me, and postpartum sweating and postpartum mood swings and all these fun things he was there for. So if I was like drenched in sweat, he got me like a washcloth or like water, things like that. But we quickly decided that he was working. I was on maternity leave, so it just didn't really make sense for us both to be sleep deprived. You also will find, at least for us and a lot of people, when you're both tired, you're more likely to kind of be at each other's throats because you're both short-tempered and you're both tired, and you've just gone through this major change of bringing a baby home. So yeah, we just quickly kind of decided that for us, it didn't make sense for him to get up. I had a water bottle that I could leave at my bedside. I didn't need him like doing things for me in the middle of the night. Like, it just was more beneficial for him to get some sleep, so at least one of us was. And then the other thing that I have heard other people do, we didn't do this we've done it a little bit more recently, but we didn't do this with either of my kids when they were little. If you are getting up as a mom in the middle of the night multiple times, the other thing that can be very helpful is then dad or whoever can get up earlier in the morning and give you a couple more hours. So let's say sometimes babies do wake up really early. Let's say they're waking up at 5 or 6. Dad can get up with baby and go take them to play or do whatever, and give you like 2 to 3 hours until the next feeding. So that is another thing. I guess 2 to 3 hours depends on when they work. But even if they can give you, like, let's say baby wakes up at 5 and they don't have to leave till 8 or 8:30, that gives them a half hour to get ready for work. That can just be very helpful. So kind of having a game plan for what you're gonna do for that. Next, one other point on that. trying to have a plan for having some time together. Now, I say all these things loosely with the word plan because your plan is going to be set on fire and will not, doesn't matter how good of a planner you are, you probably trial by fire sort of situation. It's might not work. Your plan might be horrible. It might, your baby not, there's so many variations. I did not think I was going to have a C-section with my first son, actively did everything to avoid it, and ended up with one. So, but having a loose idea of how you and your husband or significant other are going to have time together when you have that new baby is very important, because it's very easy to not make time for that and then just feel very distant. I can totally remember feeling like my life had changed completely and my husband's didn't change at all. Like, he still was golfing, he still went hunting and did like other things, which I encouraged him to do because I wanted him to be able to do those things, and still like maintain that. But we weren't really having a lot of time like connecting together just because it was very all consuming for me when we brought our son home. So, and I insisted on like doing everything myself. So I insisted on putting him to bed. I did like a 2-hour bedtime routine every night. I literally, yeah, it was ridiculous. It was fine. Like, sorry, I don't mean to say it was ridiculous because that might be what you want to do. It was what I wanted to do at the time. But looking back on it now and the difference between my daughter and my son, even my husband and I like laugh about this because my son had to have a bath every night, like at the same time. And it was this like process that like we would rush home. I would rush us home from my in-laws for dinner and like stress everyone out, including myself and probably my son, to get home so that I could do bath time. This long drawn out thing. And then I had to make sure he had his like the right sound machine setting and the right sleep sack and all these things that I actually like a lot of these tips I found from people like online, like from courses and things like that. And with my daughter, like we probably gave her a bath like maybe once a week when she came home. I still like don't bathe her very often. It's better for her skin. But yeah, there's like no semblance really of a routine for her to go to bed. I feed her and put her in a sleep sack and put her to bed. But yeah, so just with your spouse, making sure you have some time to connect with each other was my point. So I know that sometimes it kind of felt like, well, for me with my son, if the baby's awake, like it's baby time. But now I've just figured out that like babies come into your life, like you are not coming into your baby's life. And that might be a controversial topic because the baby does need you a lot, but you can still do the things you were doing and just bring the baby along. Like that's what you can do. When they're really little, they just sleep a lot and they don't hear very well and they're not startled as easily. So watch a movie with your spouse with the baby on you. And then like baby falls asleep, they're not in the room, you didn't do your bedtime routine, it's fine. They'll be fine, I promise. And just having that time to reconnect with your spouse is really important. So try to not be on your phones, try to like have some one-on-one time because it's very easy to get that lost when you bring a new baby home. Number 9, we're almost there. I know it's a long video. Go out and do stuff before your baby crawls. So both my kids crawled, I think at 7 months. Once they are more mobile and not such in like the potato phase, where they're just kind of like a blob, it's much harder to go out and do anything. Especially, I don't want to say do anything, but like go to a restaurant. So if they are still in blob stage, you can literally put them in the car seat, take it out and put, like if they're asleep or if they're just content in the car seat, have them at a restaurant. Now, if you have a very fussy baby, my son was a lot fussier than my daughter, that might feel very stressful for you. So if it does, don't do anything that adds stress. But I also think that like my fear and anxiety of my son crying or like having a meltdown in public stopped me from doing a lot of those things. And so then it kind of like was a self-fulfilling prophecy and it got worse. And then he wasn't used to going out and doing those things, so he'd cry more. So it depends on how you feel and what is important to you. But like if you used to go out and get coffee with like your girlfriends every Saturday, still go do that and like take your kid with you and they will get used to it. And if they cry, like I say this all knowing that if someone had said this to me at the time, it would have been like hard to hear and this part wouldn't have been quite as helpful, because there was something about hearing my son cry when I was a first-time mom that it wasn't just like people saying like, oh, it's okay if they cry, they're not gonna die from crying, like all babies cry. I physically could not hear that sound. Like, it was nails on a chalkboard to me. It was very anxiety provoking. So yeah, that I just tried to do everything I could to stop my baby from crying, my son. And so that, I think, is why he became a little bit more dependent on me. But I still wish that I had kind of pushed past it a little bit and taken him to do more things when he was little. And also, it was like starting to be winter at that time in Michigan, so seasonal depression can be a thing also. But yeah, just kind of still trying to do stuff before they're crawling, because once they're crawling, it's just a lot. They can't talk yet. Once they start crawling and walking, usually they can't talk at all. So they're just much more mobile, and it's hard to go do those things unless you have like a plan. Because also, even just going to like friends' houses, unless it's baby proofed to a certain extent, you know that person really well, it's just hard to do that. Whereas when they're in like potato stage, you can go to your friend's house and just put them on the floor and give them like something, or even just put them on the floor, and you can get that social time that like fills your cup back up without worrying that they're like off crawling and like eating electrical cords like my daughter tries to do every time. So that brings us to the last tip, baby wearing and getting outside. So I did not baby wear with my son very, very much. He was a bigger baby. I believe he was 8'4" when he was born, and then he got up to 20 pounds at 21 pounds at 6 months, I believe. He grew pretty big, and he's still pretty big now. So I had a little bit more pain baby wearing him. I was getting like back pain. I also had a C-section, like I mentioned. So baby wearing was not super comfortable in the beginning, because I just felt like even with a soft wrap, I didn't know how to do the soft wrap, to be honest with you. The Solly Baby I love now, but I did not know how to wrap it. And it just seemed like another thing to learn when I was home with my son, first time mom. But the structured carriers, that strap that goes like underneath them would have been right where my C-section scar was, or incision. So I didn't really baby wear with him. So I ended up carrying him a lot, which was fine, but he was a big baby, like I mentioned. And I can distinctly remember like the witching hours, which are in the evening typically, he would get so fussy, and that's usually when they want to cluster feed too. So like if they want to feed and it's every like 15 minutes, just feed them, especially if you're breastfeeding. It's super helpful for supply. It calms them down, and it does not last forever, I promise. So it's a lot on mom, and there's a lot of these things with motherhood. There's just no way like around it. There's no magic, even though there's these tricks and advice and things. There's no magic to get around the fact that being a mom is hard. It's hard work. It's a huge calling by God, and it's a way to glorify God, and it's just hard. Like, it's hard for both parents. I've heard other people say that it's going to be like 70 to 90% mom in that first year. Your situation might be different than that. You could be like primary caregiver as a dad, but traditionally speaking, like it is, and it's just a lot harder for mom. And I wish people talked about that more. Maybe people do, and I didn't know about it. But yeah, I just felt like I was prepared for it to be like 60-40, 50-50 sometimes, but oftentimes it's just a lot more on mom. Babies need mom more. They've heard you for 9 months. And that brings me to the saying of 9 months in, 9 months on, 9 months near, is what I've heard people say. So you're growing them inside you for 9 months, and then they basically want to be near you for the next 9 months. So baby wearing is just an easier way to do that. You have the freedom to be able to do more things because your hands will be free. They sleep really well in there, so it's fine if they take their naps on you. I know some people that baby wear for naps until they're like 10 months, and that's totally fine. And then 9 months near, so my son's awake, and he's trying to wake up my daughter. She's still sleeping, baby. Yeah, but so just baby wearing and outside. My son did a lot better when he was outside, especially during witching hour. So yeah, I'm gonna go before my son comes over here. But I hope those are helpful, and I'll talk to you guys soon.